Welcome everybody to this event on Yemen. It is hosted by the National Security Policy Network of the Center for International Policy Studies at the University of Ottawa. My name is Juneau and I am an associate professor here and will act as the moderator for the event. أنا أستاذ هنا في جامعة أوتاوا في معهد الدراسات العليا لشؤون العمل والدولية. هذا المساء عندنا مؤتمر عن الحرب في اليمن وخصوصا الحالة في الجنوب. سنتكلم عن الحالة الأمنية والإقليمية والحالة على الأرض. التقديم والمناقشة بعدها ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية. Except for yourself. هنا في كندا لا نتكلم عن الأزمات في اليمن. ولكن الحرب تؤدي إلى نتائج مهمة على كل المنطقة وداخل اليمن أيضا. لذلك نظن هنا مهم جدا أن نتكلم عن اليمن أكثر. The event will be in English, but I did want to welcome all of our friends. The three of the four presentations will be in English. One will be in Arabic, and as we will say at that time, there will be a PowerPoint with the text in English so that you can follow it. The event will focus specifically on the situation in the south. This is important, but if Yemen attracts only limited attention in Canadian media and in international media for that matter, the south gets even less attention. So our speakers will help us understand what is going on in the south and why it's important. In assembling this event, I had two priorities. Besides wanting to talk about Yemen. Priority number one was having speakers originally from Yemen, which I think is important. So it's the case of our four speakers, and I am very happy that that was possible. And the other priority that I always have in organizing events is to bring together people with different viewpoints to avoid groupthink in any way possible. So our four speakers, as I will introduce them, come from different professional backgrounds. Academia, fiction, NGOs, think tanks, and the political and diplomatic world. So that will really give us different viewpoints. So our four speakers, and I am very happy that all four of them accepted to join us. The order is random, but that is the order in which they will talk to us. First is Rasha Jarhum, who is the co-founder and director of Peace Track Initiative. After that, Abdul Kareem Saeed, who is with the Office of the Southern Transitional Council here in Canada. He will speak in Arabic, but there will be a PowerPoint behind him that you can follow, and we will make sure to turn the slides to follow his presentation for those who don't speak Arabic. Fatima Alasrar is a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute, joining us from Washington. And finally, Kamal Al-Solaylee, who is a professor of journalism at Ryerson University. Kamal, I am very happy to finally meet him in person. If you have not read his books, Intolerable and Brown, they are absolutely brilliant. I strongly recommend them to everyone. I asked the speakers to please keep the presentations relatively short, 7 to 8-ish minutes. And I am grateful in advance for your respect for that criteria, so that we have time for discussions after the presentation until about 7:30.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm so pleased with the turnout. This shows me how much people care about Yemen. And specifically, the topic South Yemen is not usually discussed in the context of Yemen conflict in general, so I'm so happy that it is the focus of today's event. I wanted to give you more a background of the southern issue and the history of the unification, and how I will try to also include some gender dimension. As Dr. Thomas said, Director of Peace Track Initiative, and this is a non-profit organization that's based here, but we work in Yemen and Middle East and North Africa. We try to localize and feminize the peace process, and so we see the conflict from a gender lens as much as possible. So I will also reflect a bit about women's rights. Generally, Yemen was two countries, two states. They united in 1990. The South had a socialist and more, I would say, open-minded in terms of progressive of women's rights, and the North was more a capitalist and conservative system. So these two systems came together, and as you can see already, the ideology is not a match. The first thing that happened after unification in 1990, and this was a hasty process, although the planning for it was like it took a decade long of planning for the unification, but the actual unification happened very quickly, and it was a result of the meeting between the two presidents of both countries. They met for a couple of hours and they came out and announced the unification. And the unification paper itself was a paper that had around 10 articles. You can imagine Brexit or any small world trade agreement is hundreds of pages, but for us as Yemenis, as combining two countries, it was one pager. It was not based on a constitution, so it was a decision of two people, but the people were already in the mood to accept it, because in the last 10 decades there was preparation in the media about this being an objective. And I remember at schools we used to go, and after the national anthem we will shout that we will achieve the Yemeni unification. So the first thing that happened after unification was sacrificing women's rights. We already had good political participation, and that time in the 80s we were considered progressive comparing to countries around us. We had 11% of political participation for women in the House of Representatives, and we had the chair of the House of Representatives. One of the chair was reserved for the chair of the Women Union, which was a woman always. So we, at that time, for that, it was good representation. After the unification, all the elections that happened, whether for local administration or the parliament, we always had 1%, less than 1% representation of women. In the parliament, there were around 301 members. One was a woman, and the 300 were men. So after a bit of time after the unification, tension arose, and this was mainly because they couldn't restructure especially the security and military, let's say, sectors, and there was assassinations specifically for South leaders, and so the Southerner leaders decided that we're gonna disengage. And we had the first civil war 4 years into the unification in 1994. After that war, the North regime has won and took over, and we saw more deterioration in terms of women's rights. The women's rights were sacrificed, and we had so many guardianship rules. After we had, in the South, women had the right to marry, right to work, right to do everything in equal rights, but after that war, everything changed and guardianship rules has been introduced, and today women cannot even obtain a passport without the blessing of their male guardian. They cannot work, they cannot travel, they cannot do anything without the male guardian. Now, of course, families, not all of them abide by the law, and some of them are progressive, like my family, but this is not the case for all Yemeni women. And specifically now in the war, we can see that women are not able to leave the country without the permission of their husbands or male guardians, or even cannot marry without the permission of their male guardians. There was also systematic suppression for the Southerners after 1994. First of all, many of the military and civil servants in the South were forced into retirement. For us, when we put a gender lens in that, for example, the military sector, we had so many women from the South in the military sector. This is nothing that you see in the North. So, or even now, after the unification, very limited numbers of women in the security and military sector. At the time, we had so many women, and they were all let go, part of this suppressive practices. Another thing, the law changed to include penalties towards the Southerners who are calling for self-determination or disengagement. And there was death penalty and confiscation of property for anyone who is threatening the unity. So this was in 1995 changes. So the time passed, and people in the south, because of all the suppression, started to this frustration go to the street. It went to the street, and the Arab Spring in Yemen actually started in 2007 because the Southerners organized themselves and they were continuously demonstrating to call. First, their calls were based on rights, based on rightful demands, and then with time and more separation, and they were many times faced with vicious force, these demands changed into self-determination and full independence. With this current process, or before this current process, when in the Arab Spring, when it happened in 2011, we had a period, a transitional period, where we went into a national dialogue, and in the national dialogue we had all the political factions represented. For the Southerners, this was the first time the South issue was seriously discussed in a political system, in a political process. But the Southerners who were represented in this national dialogue, they were only one faction, so not all this, and one of the factions actually boycotted the process. There were a number of confidence building measures that were supposed to be taking place before the dialogue start to encourage Southerners to participate. These included an apology from the government, compensation, reparation, returning of lands, resolving the issue of the retirees. However, none of these, there were 31 points, confidence building points, and none of these were implemented except for the apology of the government. That was the only thing that was implemented. So, and within the national dialogue outcomes, the vision of the South faction that they presented, a vision that included, their vision included that we want a transitional period of 3 years. Within this transitional period, we want to build the institutional capacity for the countries in the South and in the North. Within these 3 years, it has to be a federal state from 2 provinces according to the borders of 1990. So it was like a preparation for self-determination and separation. And within that vision, they also called for a constitution for the Southerners to exit basically from the unification. Their views were not taken into account in the national dialogue, and in the national dialogue there were only temporary remedies for the South issue. For example, within the new constitution, it says the Southerners will be in the parliament represented by 50% for only 2 rounds of elections. So it was not a permanent solution as well. When this war happened, and the first rounds of first rounds of negotiations, we saw that the South issue was not discussed because the war was viewed that it is between the Houthees and between the government, and the South issue was completely ignored, although the war had consequences and impact in the South. The Southerners started calling, we want to discuss the South issue, we want to participate in the peace process, and nobody listened to them. They also said, everybody was saying that they don't have a political entity that represents them. And hence we saw the creation of the South Transitional Council, who presented themselves as the carrier for the political cause, which is the Southern issue. The South Transitional Council, when it was formed, again it was excluded. They called peacefully many times to be included in the peace process, but they were excluded. And as civil society, we kept saying that Southerners have to be included. Not necessarily only the South Transitional Council, but all the Southerners, even those who are pro-unity, they have to be included in the peace process. The South issue itself has to be discussed on its own. First, South-South dialogue, and then South-North dialogue, if we really want a sustainable solution.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi everyone, thank you for coming tonight. My presentation about the Southern issue is the core of the Yemeni crisis. السيدات الحاضرون جميعا، في البداية دعوني نوضح لكم أسباب ومراحل تفاقم الأزمة اليمنية بين شريكي مشروع الوحدة قيادة الدولتين السابقتين جمهورية اليمن الديمقراطية الشعبية والجمهورية العربية اليمنية. الأمر الذي أدى إلى تجلي نوايا إفشال مشروع الوحدة منذ اللحظة الأولى من طرف واحد، وذلك من خلال رفض تنفيذ بنود الاتفاق والتنصل عن مضامينه، ومن ثم إعلان الحرب على الطرف الجنوبي وتحويل الوحدة الطوعية إلى احتلال وضم وإلحاق قهري لشعب الجنوب. واسمحوا لي أن أوضح لكم الحقائق التالية. أولاً، في يوم 22 مايو 90 قامت قيادة الحزب الاشتراكي اليمني بقيادة الرئيس علي سالم البيض الذي كان يقود دولة الجنوب مع الرئيس علي عبد الله صالح بإعلان البيان السياسي المفاجئ لشعبنا في توحيد بلادنا جمهورية اليمن الديمقراطية الشعبية مع الجمهورية العربية اليمنية من دون موافقة شعبية ومن دون إجراء أي استفتاء للشعبين في الدولتين. ولم يتم أيضا الدمج التدريجي لمؤسسات الدولتين خلال الثلاث سنوات من المرحلة الانتقالية أيضا. ثانيا، ما حدث هو أن قيادة الطرف الآخر للجمهورية العربية اليمنية علاوة على حقيقة افتقارها لتجربة الدولة وكذا حالة الرفض للعمل المؤسسي والدولة عموما، فقد كانت غير صادقة في الوحدة ويطغى على أدائها الفكر الإقصائي وبكل ما يلازمه من ثقافة وسلوك الهيمنة والاستحواذ والنهب للأرض والثروة الجنوبية، ما يعني أن خطة آمرية قد رسمت قبل التوقيع على عقد الوحدة لابتلاع دولة الجنوب أرضا وإنسانا وضمها إلى العربية اليمنية. ثالثا، وخلال هذه الفترة أيضا 151 شخصية سياسية وعسكرية وأمنية تم اغتيالها في سنة واحدة بعد الوحدة. ثالثا، تصاعدت الأزمة في الدولة الجديدة وتم الاتفاق بين رئيسي الحزبين في الدولتين الذين وقعا على اتفاقية الوحدة، وتم تشكيل لجنة للحوار من أعضاء الأحزاب السياسية والشخصيات الاجتماعية البارزة للوصول إلى حل الأزمة وإصلاح الخلل في الوحدة. استمر ذلك لأشهر بوساطة ورعاية من المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية ودول عربية وجامعة الدول العربية. توصلت إلى صيغة اتفاق تم التوقيع عليه في 18 يناير 94 سمي بوثيقة العهد والاتفاق. رابعا، وقبل البدء بتنفيذ الوثيقة انقلب الرئيس صالح مرة أخرى على الوثيقة وأعلن الحرب على مؤسسات دولة الجنوب السابقة يوم 27 أبريل 94. استمرت هذه الحرب 72 يوما، انتهت بهزيمة دولة الجنوب وتم احتلال كامل أراضيها في 7/7/94 بتحالف القوى الإرهابية المتطرفة والعائدون من أفغانستان، حيث أصدرت تلك القوى فتاوي لإباحة دم الجنوبيين باعتبارهم علمانيين وملحدين كفرة، كما جاء في الفتوى الشهيرة للشيخ عبد الوهاب الديلمي. خامسا، هناك قرارات دولية لمجلس الأمن الدولي رقم 924-931 لعام 94 وبيان أبها لدول مجلس التعاون الخليجي، والتي دعت جميعها إلى وقف الحرب فورا وحل الخلافات السياسية بالوسائل السلمية وعدم فرض الوحدة بالقوة، ولم يلتزم بها نظام صنعاء. خامسا، بعد الحرب مباشرة تم طرد غالبية الموظفين الجنوبيين مدنيين وعسكريين وأمنيين من كافة وظائفهم، حتى بلغ عدد المطرودين ما يقارب 700,000 قيادي وموظف. وشرع الرئيس صالح ونظامه بنهب كل مؤسسات دولة الجنوب السابقة وتوزيعها كغنائم حرب على النافذين وأتباعه وأنصاره وعملائه من تجار الحرب، بما في ذلك حقول النفط وأراضي الدولة والممتلكات الخاصة للجنوبيين. سابعا، في 7/7/2007 بدأت احتجاجات المسرحين قصرا من أعمالهم مدنيين وعسكريين وأمنيين من خلال التظاهرات السلمية للمطالبة بعودتهم إلى وظائفهم ومساواتهم بزملائهم موظفي ما كان يعرف بالجمهورية العربية اليمنية، إلا أن مظاهراتهم السلمية واجهتها أجهزة الأمن العسكرية الشمالية بالقمع والعنف والاعتقالات، وكانت حصيلة عنف وإرهاب الدولة اليمنية ضد الجنوبيين آلاف الشهداء والجرحى والمعتقلين ومئات المشردين خارج وطنهم. ومنذ تأسيس الحراك الجنوبي السلمي تم تنظيم أكثر من 17 مليونية العاصمة عدن للتظاهر السلمي والمطالبة بفك الارتباط بين الدولتين السابقتين واستعادة دولة الجنوب. ثامنا، في مارس 2015 تحالفت قوى الاحتلال اليمني القديم مع الحوثيين أنصار الله للقيام بغزو وعدوان على الجنوب انتهى باحتلال جديد لأرضه وإنسانه، فانتفض شعبنا في الجنوب لمقاومة الغزو البربري الشمالي حتى تمكنوا من تحرير معظم الأراضي الجنوبية بدعم لوجستي من دول التحالف بقيادة المملكة العربية السعودية ودولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. تاسعا، بعد الانتصار الذي حقق شعبنا في الجنوب وطرد قوات صالح والحوثيين من أرضه، استمرت المعاناة ضد شعبنا في المناطق المحررة في كافة نواحي الحياة الإنسانية الضرورية، وإهمال متعمد من قبل حكومة الشرعية الفاسدة لمطالب شعبنا في تحسين حياته المعيشية والأمنية إلى جانب مطالبه التحررية. ليستمر العبث بأمن واستقرار الجنوب من قبل القوى الإرهابية داعش والقاعدة التي كانت تسعى إلى إحكام السيطرة على عدن والمناطق المحررة لتحويلها إلى قندهار أخرى، لولا تصدي المقاومة الجنوبية البطلة والدعم اللوجستي من قبل دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. 10. لقد خرج شعبنا في 4 مايو 2017 بأكبر مليونية في العاصمة الجنوبية عدن ليعلن بيان عدن التاريخي المتضمن تفويضا شعبيا لقائد المقاومة الجنوبية اللواء عيدروس قاسم الزبيدي لتشكيل قيادة جنوبية برئاسته لقيادة المرحلة الانتقالية، وصولا إلى تحقيق تطلعات شعبنا نحو الحرية واستعادة الدولة بنظام فيدرالي جديد يسودها العدل والمساواة واحترام حقوق الإنسان والمرأة وحرية التعبير ومحاربة الفساد والتطرف والإرهاب. وأصبح المجلس الانتقالي الجنوبي المعبر عن الإرادة الشعبية الجنوبية اليوم هو من يمثل شعب الجنوب أمام العالم والأقليم في أي مباحثات أو تسوية سياسية قادمة. المؤسف أن معظم الجهود والمبادرات والمؤتمرات واللقاءات والاجتماعات التي تعالج الأزمة اليمنية تتجه إلى معالجة مشكلة السلطة بصنعاء، ولم يدرك الجميع بتصويب الحل لحل جوهر الأزمة والتي هي قضية الشعب العربي في الجنوب، وهو ما كان يسمى جمهورية اليمن الديمقراطية الشعبية المعترف بها دوليا، الدولة التي كانت عضوا في الأمم المتحدة وفي المنظمات الدولية قبل دخول الوحدة الفاشلة. وبدون حل القضية الجنوبية لن يعم السلام والأمن في المنطقة بدرجة أساسية ولا في الأقليم بشكل عام، وسيظل الوضع يهدد السلام والأمن الدوليين بشكل أو بآخر، خاصة والجنوب يطل على أهم الممرات التجارية الدولية مضيق باب المندب وخليج عدن الذي تمر فيه الواردات والصادرات الدولية بين آسيا وأفريقيا وأوروبا. نأمل من المبعوث الدولي مارتن جريفيث ومن المجتمعين الدولي والأقليمي وكل الدول المحبة للسلام ومن ضمنها دولة كندا إلى بذل الجهود مع الدول الراعية للسلام في اليمن لحل الأزمة اليمنية المركبة من خلال التفهم لمطالب شعب الجنوب العادلة في استعادة دولته وسيادته على كامل أرضه المعترف بها دوليا قبل عام 1990 وحقه بتقرير المصير وفقا لقواعد القانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة والمعاهدات الدولية. السيدات والسادة الحاضرين جميعا، إن اتفاق الرياض يعد مدخلا أساسيا هاما لوقف الحرب في اليمن والوصول إلى تسوية سياسية سلمية للأزمة اليمنية. لهذا نؤكد حرص المجلس الانتقالي الجنوبي على تنفيذ هذا الاتفاق، ونطالب ما تسمى بالشرعية اليمنية الالتزام بتنفيذه أيضا من دون مماطلة ووضع العراقيل، حيث هناك قوى نافذة على وجه الخصوص حزب الإصلاح الذي يسعى لإفشال الاتفاق ويعمل وفق أجندات خارجية للتنسيق مع القاعدة وداعش لزعزعة الأمن في المناطق الجنوبية وتفكير الوضع عسكريا. لهذا نطالب الدول الراعية والدول الداعمة لاتفاق الرياض بالضغط على الحكومة اليمنية لتنفيذ الاتفاق والدفع بالعملية السياسية السلمية باتجاه الحل الشامل لأزمة اليمن والقضية الجنوبية بما يخدم الشعبين الشقيقين ودول الجوار والمنطقة بشكل عام لإحلال السلام والأمن والاستقرار والتنمية المستدامة. وأخيرا نؤكد على أهمية مشاركة المجلس الانتقالي الجنوبي في التسوية السياسية القادمة لضمان نجاح مساعي الأمم المتحدة لوقف الحرب وإحلال السلام في اليمن والمنطقة. وشكرا جزيلا.
Thank you all for being here. Just arrived today from Washington, and Washington seems tropical in comparison to here. So I'm never complaining about the weather there again. I suppose I don't know why people would come for an event on the south of Yemen. This wouldn't have grabbed anybody's attention just maybe a couple of years ago. So, but I think part of the reason why we're here and why we're discussing this, and part of the reason why we want to know now about the history and about the root causes and what's going on, and is because Yemen was on a brink of another civil war within the current war that's there. So, back in August, not too long ago, last year, there was a Houthi drone or ballistic missile attack that took the lives of over 50 military men, who most of which were Southerners. It happened in the capital, Aden, and the commander who died was Abu Yamam al-Yafi'i, who was well known, well respected. And what was interesting is that, although he was very respected for the Southerners, I think, the majority of the country didn't care. And I think this just showed how fractured the country is. So there is this domestic attitude in Yemen that actually reflects how just maybe irreconcilable things might seem. And at the same time that the Southerners were mourning this commander, the rest of the country was saying he was a traitor and he was a pro-UAE agent, somewhat. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of the domestic attitudes, the international attitudes towards the South, and a little bit of the regional dimension. We hear so much about, of course, the involvement in the UAE and the backing of the Southern Transitional Council, and you just heard my colleague just, praise them and praise their effort. But of course, was this good? Was this good for the Southern Transitional Council, etc.? So I'm going to just flesh this out a little bit. So just as Rasha has mentioned before, unification which occurred in 1990. I think there was momentum for it. There was a lot of hope, but with unification came marginalization. With unification came exploitation. And it happened in such a brief amount of time. Within 3 years after unifying, the leaders said, we want out of this. So, and it came after, a high death toll and assassinations of Southern leaders. But of course, the international attitudes did not look at this favorably. There was somewhat regional backers. Because of the Gulf War, the Gulf again played a hand, and they tried to, because Yemen did not necessarily side with the Gulf War. So I think, Kuwait, other countries were trying to push towards secession too, but that didn't happen. And 1994 unlocked even a further period of marginalization and economic marginalization, and the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh somewhat gave the Muslim Brotherhood Party, the Islah, the South, almost as a booty. So there was a lot of exploitation, a lot of injustice coming from the leaders of the Islah Party. And this also created, again, not just a fracture within the Yemeni state, but a fracture within, this political party in the Yemeni state that tried to really control the South and somewhat, change its social fabric, because there was a lot of, as Rasha mentioned, women had a leading role, and the society was a little bit more active. Suddenly it became Islamized, and that triggered a lot of people in the South. Of course, as mentioned before, 2007 unrest happened in the South. It continued to escalate with the Arab Spring. That unrest was there, but after the Arab Spring, after the process of national dialogue, so after Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former president, stepped down, there was a period of national reconciliation. It was trying to be as inclusive as possible, but regardless of that inclusivity, people still felt isolated. There were economic issues, bread and butter issues, and most of all, just a sense of alienation that was not quite reflected in the national dialogue. And even as Rasha talked about the apology that came in the national dialogue for all the mistakes that had happened before in the South, it was a bit of a threatening apology, because he said, we apologize for what happened, but talking about unity is still a red line. Disunity, don't talk about it. and that was somewhat threatening as well. So the messages never really changed, and there was no real seriousness in terms of changing all the attitudes. Moreover, I remember being in the south of Yemen in 2013, and I came to see some of the demonstrations that were there. They call them million people march. It's never really a million people march, but there was just a lot of participation. The main criticism back then is that there was no unified leadership. And the main criticism is that the driver behind all of this mobilization for disunity, yes, it was economic grievance, but that the leaders, and especially the former leaders who participated in the civil war, were in the driver's seat. So it was the former president, Al-Bid, who was driving these, and you could see people carrying his pictures in the street. And when I talked to people, they said, "Oh, we don't care. He's just a vessel. He is someone who we're standing behind him right now, but we want, of course, someone else when the dust settles and when we disunite." And it also felt like it didn't give people a lot of confidence in terms of like what would happen if there is secession. And I think that part of the problem is that the Southerners were also suppressing other voices that were saying, what next? What comes next? Because yes, there was all of this process of marginalization, of exploitation, but then what about like a new generation that is born to a woman from the south and a father from the north? So there were intermarriages. There's really not so much cleavages in the society as much as just political mismanagement. And I think this is one of the things where in the south there was just a lot of overrepresentation in terms of emotional just emotional reaction towards everything that's happening, but less of a thought in terms of what's going to happen actually next. So this was a part that somewhat came suspended after so the national dialogue period was in 2013, and in 2014 the Houthees took over the north of the country. But after they took over the north, they expanded to the south. So they invaded the south, and this had deepened the sense of marginalization that Southerners felt, that this is again yet another invasion, and the south had to fight them with everything that they had. There were massacres in the south. Over 3,000 people died, and you did not hear about that in the news because it was just a local, and this was, by the way, this was in the span of 3 to 4 months, and thousands of people died, dengue fever, all types of catastrophes because Houthis were viciously fighting in the street, and we didn't hear about it because it was a local conflict happening somewhere. And at that time there was no Arab coalition, there was no assistance, so that didn't come to, there was not so much focus on it. Towards the end of my time, if you can just give me 2 more minutes, I'll talk about the regional dimensions. So at this point, it's then that Saudi Arabia intervened, because the president of Yemen had escaped to Saudi Arabia, asked for Saudi Arabia to intervene. They intervened. The first point of entry was the port of Aden, was in the south. And within the south, they found local resistance, they found capable manpower that they were able to use to their advantage. And they said, okay, well, if we do this, then we could end the war within days, and we could just have Houthis pushed back to Sada. Little did they know. The first thing that they did was liberate the south, and I think that came after having a resistance army. And part of why this worked is because the south already had that resistant army, because they were A, heading that direction, B, felt marginalized from the government. So there was really the infrastructure there to protect themselves and protect their cities. Otherwise, I think the catastrophe would have even been, 10 times worse. So since then, the Saudis and the UAE have started working on this. The Saudis somewhat were working with the government, but the United Arab Emirates nurtured the local resistance and the local police and the local military, and created what was called the Southern Belt Forces to stop from the incursions of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which was really, really thriving in the south. And the theory back then is that because the south was becoming a stable state, it was elements in the north that were trying to destabilize the south by bringing more of terrorist attacks and trying to destabilize the state that way. This alliance continued strong throughout the conflict. The Southern Army became a critical army in terms of moving to liberate critical areas in the north, and it was quite effective until it reached Hodeidah, and any type of skirmishes or battles in Hodeidah were foreseen as catastrophic for Yemen as a whole, because Hodeidah was the port that receives a lot of the humanitarian aid and such. So. With that in mind, and I'm going to try to wrap up really quickly, is that comes the question afterwards, is after the Battle of Hodeidah that everybody was preparing for a very long time did not happen. You've had all of this massive, 90,000 people, militia people from the south who are waiting for orders what to do. And you have this aspiration for secession, and I think it was directed there. So the minute that the South felt threatened, the first reaction was, it's time for us to secede, and we have the force and manpower to do it. So, and that's basically what triggered the conflict in 2000. Last year, in August last year. From Saudi Arabia's perspective, it does not want to see Yemen splinter, because then it will have to worry about a small Houthi state on their border, and that would be quite problematic. So Saudi Arabia is pushing hard against secession. And at the same time, from the UAE's perspective, there's enough incentive for it to see secession, because it's empowerment of the Southern Transitional Council, which is completely backed by the United Arab Emirates. I mean, not saying that the STC doesn't have any agency, but that it had benefited, generously from the UAE, which created some problems also within the South, because there are other groups that feel that maybe the UAE wants more from the South, such as its islands, its ports, etc. So they're pushing back and challenging the narrative that through an STC backed secession, that the objectives that Southerners want will be achieved. So in a nutshell, with these two, the UAE and the Saudi Arabia were at odds with each other. People thought that there would be conflict between both countries, which I feel is extremely naive. But what the STC has done, which I think was very clever, is that the STC were reaching to Saudi Arabia and saying, we are not going to do anything without your blessing. And I think what the STC wanted to do is to make sure that it has that alliance that the government has with Saudi Arabia. So as opposed to saying UAE-backed STC, now you have Saudi UAE-backed STC, which I think was their objective. Where this led us was to a Riyadh agreement, which was initially supposed to be in Jeddah, and then it moved to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And despite the fact that the government of Yemen did not even want to sit in the same room as the STC, by the end of it, they ended up shaking hands. And, well, not necessarily shaking hands, but basically ended up with this agreement where power sharing for the government occurred. And this was a turning point. And I think from this lens, people were starting to be hopeful even about Yemen as a whole. It's like if you can bring the south and the north, which is the government, into a power sharing agreement, then maybe we can replicate the same with the Houthis, except not so much for various reasons. The Houthis have a different regional actor and backer who does not want to see that peace come about.
And now for something completely different, because I'm not as steeped in the politics as my fellow panelists, but I'm a writer, a non-fiction writer and a journalist, and I have written substantially about Yemen for Canadian media, but I want to talk about Yemen from a completely different perspective. So here goes. At the risk of sounding like Daphne du Maurier's heroine, Rebecca, and her Manderley estate, last night I dreamt of Aden. Well, not quite last night, but frequently and recently, thoughts of Aden have been crossing my mind, awake or asleep. I was born there, as was my father. I was born in 1964, and my father in 1925, almost a century ago. I've been thinking about it because I'm currently working on my third book of nonfiction to be published later this year. This is a free promotion, so indulge me. And it's a book about homelands, returns, and life's endings. No, I'm not dying, but as I get older, I'm beginning to think more and more about where I want my body to be laid to rest. This is very morbid, I'm sorry. But if you asked me 4 or 5 years ago, where would you like to be buried, I would have insisted on Toronto, the only place that truly feels like home to me. But I've been thinking a lot about my place of birth, the city of Aden, and the southern part of Yemen. That should be my final destination. I like to end where I started. Everything in between is just a journey, a life's distraction. In reporting this book, I traveled to the Basque region of Spain, to Jamaica, to Northern Ireland, to Taiwan and Ghana, and a couple other places to try to understand this phenomenon of return migration. I spoke to Americans, British and Canadians who left behind the countries that they fought so hard to get into and resettled in their countries that they fought so hard to leave. History, politics, critical theory, literature, and social sciences have given us multiple, even definitive narratives and analyses about why people leave their homelands. But returns remain ambivalent, misunderstood, underexplored. In an influential study of diasporas, the scholar Robin Cohen, who's a scholar of globalization and migration, identifies return movements as one of the essential steps in establishing international communities organized around a shared national or ethnic origin. There's no immigration without return. Still, it's the outward journey that takes precedence when global movements are documented. Journalists like me get all excited, or panic, depends where you come from, when refugees arrive, but drop the story when governments hosting large populations of the displaced give them incentive to return. I wanted to know what's it like to go home, as the late cultural critic Stuart Hall put it, to experience, quote, the endless desire to return to lost origins, to be one again with the mother, to go back to the beginning. That desire burned within me even when the people and places I visited suggested that a homeland return for me was not the end of a journey, but the start of a new and often more troubling one. I began the reporting in 2017 and finished it in the summer of 2019, all the while thinking that by the time I report from my next destination, the war in Yemen would be over, and I would have a chance to examine whether my longing for Aden is actually a grand fantasy or something I can actually start planning. Unlike the Americans of Irish or Basque or Ghanaian heritage, going back to Aden will not be easy. It may not even be possible or advisable. For one thing, I don't really know the place. I left at 3. I was 3 years old. But like anyone from Aden who was exiled from it will tell you, and as I detailed in my first book, I grew up on stories of Aden that made it sound more of a Babylon than a port city, or a British protectorate, a stop east of Suez and on the passage to India. So much so that I called one of the chapters that detailed life in Aden Camelot. It's how it's been described to me by my very Anglophile father and my very enthusiastic siblings. The Aden that they and their generation talked about was cosmopolitan before many of them understood the term. It was a place where Indians, Jews, Africans, Arabs, Persians, Baha'is coexisted. A place where the only church in that part of Arabia stood, and I hope it still stands, I'm not sure, and where a Persian temple welcomed this community. Where my grandmother's mother earned the name of Aisha al-Hindiya, or Aisha the Indian, because of how much time she spent with the Indian community, and where my Aunt Noor's first husband came from an Indian family that had called Aden home for many decades. I mention all of this not so much to indulge in a little nostalgia, but because I wonder if this nostalgia for a grand, mythical Aden and its surrounding area is not in part motivating some of the secession talks and sentiments. Make Aden great again, MAGA. A nostalgia for a bygone age of American prosperity and middle-class independence and purchasing power underwrites part of the current American nationalism debacle. But what underwrites the same in southern Yemen? I think we've heard the historical context. But let me just be devil's advocate for a little bit. Are we actually longing for British rule? Our own slice of Raj porn? Or are we longing for the economic stagnation of early 70s, when the closure of the Suez Canal in Egypt and the Soviet-style economics left the country in tatters? I completely understand how, because nostalgia has been my birthright. I did not know Aden, but I lived on the legacy of stories about Aden. And at the heart of those stories was the house on the hill, a certain house on the hill. Ever since I was a child, my family talked about a dilapidated old house in Khormaksar, on the outskirts of Aden. It's called Beit al-Gabal, or the mountain house, even though it's just on a hill and not in a mountain. And my father built it for my grandparents, his parents, to keep them from nagging my mother. The house and the mostly arid land around it have stayed in our family name despite a few decades of communism, in which the government of what was then South Yemen confiscated private properties, including all of my father's real estate business. I have never seen that house, never set foot in it, even when I visited Aden in 1992, which was the last time I visited Aden. I've been to Sana'a several times since. But in the past 8 years or so, my brothers and sisters have been slowly restoring and decorating it with all furniture from the main family home. Because of its elevation, the house provides a cool reprieve from Aden's punishing heat in the spring and summer. It's hardly what you might call a cunning cottage, but it's not connected to the local sewer system, such as that is. A similar or fancier place in Ontario or anywhere in the world would scare the daylight out of me, who after 25 years in Canada is yet to visit a cottage, a cabin, a chalet, whatever the hell Canadians call this, retreats from the city. But that family house in the mountains, in the city where I and my 10 siblings were born, where my late mother and father got married and lived for 22 years before we all fled the post-independence turbulence of 1967, keeps calling me. I have an uncontrollable desire to return to it, return in quotation marks, doesn't work very well when you read, but to live in it for however long I can manage. I want to feel close to my roots, to my great-grandmother, Aisha, who died before I was born, to the memory of my parents and the aunts and uncle. I lost an aunt and an uncle in this war, whose faces stare at me in the family photos, but some of them I hardly know. As a former theatre critic and film critic in Toronto, I've often poked fun at similar stories that brown and black people particularly love telling. I owe them a retroactive apology, well, some of them anyway. Some of them were really shitty and they don't deserve an apology. I get it, but because I get it now, I really do. I don't know why it's taken me so long to think of my return to Aden, or if my thoughts represent a natural progression, a delusion, or in all likelihood, a midlife crisis. All I know is that there is a war that's getting in the way of me going back home. Thank you.